seen through smoke and fire. However, the mutant soon makes himself visible. Isabel holds her head in despair and says her attacks are not effective. She says the monster did not move a bit. Locust-Traman looks at her and says it seems she is unaware of her powers. He says the mutant's skin gained a high resistance against the fire magic when it evolved. He tells Isabel that it is probably because of the drakes. He says it is an attribute evolution. Isabel looks at the approaching mutant and asks Locust-Traman what they are supposed to do in this situation. He asks her what she thinks. He says there is one way to deal with him. He says in case the fire is not working on him. He adds they can use ice. He forms strong ice crystals in the air to cope with the current scenario. Isabel feels cold. She folds her arms in front of her. She says the surrounding temperature dropped significantly just by creating 2 small ice spears in the air. She says it seems like the winter is finally coming. Isabel looks at Locust-Traman, who is Frey Blake for everyone. She says Frey Blake always reminds her of the great mage Locust-Traman. Locust-Traman keeps forming ice spears in the air. He turns their direction toward the mutant to defeat him. The ice spears badly hit the mutant. Isabel feels happy to see that they are finally in a position to deal with a gigantic monster. But suddenly, the situation changes against them. The mutant again gets ready to strike them. Isabel says no, this is not possible. A few shreds of ice spear are thrust into the mutant's body. But the ice spears failed to injure him. Isabel says even the powerful ice spears failed to pierce his skin. The situation seems dangerous. The mutant tears a tree from the center and walks toward them. Isabel runs to save herself. Locust-Traman says the mutant is quite tough to defeat. Isabel again attacks the mutant with numerous firefalls. She asks Locust-Traman how he can be so easygoing. 2 fireballs hit the mutant right in the face. He stops for a while. He takes the fireballs aside, opens his big mouth and growls. Both Isabel and Locust-Traman disappear from the mutant. Locust-Traman says the mutant has undergone an attribute evolution. He says the skin and bones are reinforced like steel. Isabel looks at him and says this is not the right time to be amazed. She says the best way to deal with a strength like her is to burn with fire magic. Locust-Traman says the mutant's skin has high resistance to fire. Isabel asks what about burying him alive with the help of the earthquake like the last time. Locust-Traman says yuck. How can she be such a musclehead? He asks her if she is trying to drag all the drakes here using a noisy spell like this. He says they need to be discreet. Isabel says it is already very noisy. He says there is a well-digging technique for situations like this. Isabel asks him what a well-digging technique is. The mutant spots them. He looks at them and growls. Isabel gets scared to see this. He asks her not to get mad and to calm down. Isabel asks him why he is using an ineffective ice spear again. She feels cold because of the ice spears. Locust-Traman says they should only dig a single well into succeeding. Isabel seems unable to comprehend. She asks him what he means. The mutant comes toward them. Locust-Traman creates multiple small ice spears in the air. The mutant seems ready to attack them. He runs in their direction. Isabel shouts to see the monster. Locust-Traman asks her to stop making noise as they need to be discreet. He forms a big ice spear and moves it toward the mutant. The ice spear hits the mutant right in the center eye. The mutant sighs with pain. However, he keeps running toward them. Isabel says to see the ice spears are not working on him. She asks him to use another magic spell. He asks her to stay quiet. He says he is trying to concentrate. He concentrates on the mutant to hit the nail right in the head. He hits one after another ice spear in the mutant's third eye. He keeps hitting the same again and again. He points to the third and fourth ice spears at the same point. He again hits him right between 2 eyes. Then he hits 3 more times on the same part to knock the mutant down. He hits the mutant on the same point for the 8th time. The mutant stops on that hit. The mutant gets on his knees when he aims for the 9th time. He hits the 10th time and says it is over. A pile of ice spears appears at the mutant's head. The mutant growls loudly with pain but still manages to get balance. Isabel gets afraid to see him. Locust-Traman points another hit with the movement of his hand and the mutant falls to the ground. They stand by the dead body of the mutant. Locust-Traman addresses her and says that digging one single well is better. Isabel says yes to him. They move forward. They look upward at the flock of drakes. He gets mad at Isabel and says she has gathered all the drakes here. The drake flies toward them and opens his big mouth to attack. Locust Traman says there is no time for rest in that sort of journey. The drake releases heavy fire flames at them. Heavy fire, flame, and smoke can be seen everywhere around. Locust Traman knocks down 2 of the drakes with the help of an ice spear. Their bodies lay dead on the ground, with pieces of ice spears stuck in their bodies. Locust Traman forms a protection shield around him and Isabel to avoid a fire attack. The protection shield only lasts for a short time. They start to run to save their lives. Locust Traman forms a big ice arrow and points it to the drake, following them. The drake somehow manages to block that attack. In return, the drake releases another heavy breath full of fire flames. Isabel appears to be an obvious victim of that attack. Locust Traman jumps up to the height of the drake and starts attacking him with the ice spear. The eyes of the drake blaze with fire, but the next moment, his eyes turn cold. Then the drake falls to the ground with a noisy sound. He hits the drake right in the head and knocks him down. They look at the dead body of the drake. The moment they decided to go ahead, they heard another growling voice. They looked backward and found another gigantic monster to deal with. Isabel was about to say something to see that monster. Locust Traman puts his hand at her mouth to prevent her from making any sound. He hushes her and asks her to be quiet. He tells her that the monster is the king of drakes. He says this is not the monster that he can defeat right now. He says they should wait for him to leave. They hide themselves to avoid the king of the drakes. The king drake's eyes blaze with fire. Isabel panics because of fear of drake. Locust Traman keeps preventing her from making any sound. The drake king starts to move in another direction. Locust Traman removes his hand from Isabel's mouth. She starts to cough. They look around to find a place to sit and practice mana. They reach a big rock at a height. They sit on it and start practicing. Locust Traman sits and mediates. On the other, Isabel tries to heal his wounds. After some time, she has finished healing his injuries. A butterfly sits on Locust Traman's finger. He looks at the butterfly and starts talking with it. He says they have been fighting with the monsters for the last 2 months. He says now his mind is in full synchronization with his body. He says this is enough to say it was worth coming to the mountain range. He says there is still something that he wants to do. He asks Isabel to let's go. He tells Isabel this is where Schweizer's dungeon. They intend to move toward the mountain drake. Dark clouds cover the mountain top. Dark clouds also cover the lake. They create ice barriers in the air and move upward by taking the support of ice barriers. Locust Traman asks Isabel not to deactivate her barriers. He says considering Schweizer's personality, it would not be a matter of surprise that he must have kept some monsters in the lake. Isabel thinks for a moment. She asks him how he knows that Schweizer's dungeon is there. He says Schweizer had a bad habit of talking. Locust Traman repeats Schweizer's words that the mountains pierced through the clouds. At its peak, there would be a beautiful lake, and there would be a little island. He says that Schweizer told him that he wanted to live in such a luxurious place. He remembers Schweizer's words as he and Isabel move upward towards the top. Then they move over the lake to find the island. Isabel hears his words and asks him who he is. He ignores her and says he found it. They reach the island. They step down on the ground of the island. Isabel looks around and says this is such a magnificent island. There is vast space around them. Locust Traman calls Schweizer a sneaky lad. Isabel looks at him as if she is trying to understand what he means by that. Locust Traman looks around and says there is a dungeon beneath the island that is many times bigger than the island itself. Isabel was shocked to hear this. She asks him what he means by that. He says this island is just an entrance to the dungeon. He says it looks humble, but it is still extravagant. He says everything is just like him. Isabel feels as if he knows Schweizer personally. They walk onto the island. They reach a gigantic tree. There is a big hole in the stem of the tree. The hole looks like a door. Isabel wonders how a tree can be this big. Locust Traman says it is clear that it is the entrance. They peek inside the hole and find there are stairs as well. Locust Traman says he also made stairs inside. He tells how nice of him. They step down the stairs. Shining yellow crystal-shaped lights hang everywhere inside the tree on the sides of the stairs. Isabel wants to call Frey. She wants to ask him something. She stops herself from asking any questions. She thinks she should not bother with useless thoughts. They keep stepping down. As they further step down, they notice something. They find a magnificent door there. The door is closed. The door shines brightly with light blue lights. Locust Troman looks at the door closely. He touches it. Isabel asks him how they would open the door. Locust Troman tells Isabel that it is a spell that Schweizer concocted himself. He says if they try to open it, it will obliterate them. Isabel tries to understand what he is saying. Locust Troman comes close to a blue globe placed on the light side of the door on a holder. He touches the globe. The moment he touches the globe, it emits a strong magical aura. Isabel steps back. She asks him why there is smoke. Big clouds of white smoke can be seen there. Soon, a boy comes out of that smoke. The boy stays in the middle of the air and says tada. The boy says 1 2, 1 2, mic test, mic test. He asks if they can hear him. Isabel says he is such an odd boy. She looks at Locust Troman and asks him who he is. He stays still and does not move even a little. Isabel calls him. The boy says he welcomes them to the dungeon. The boy says he does not know what the measly magicians like them are pursuing in that place, but still he welcomes them. Locust Troman brings his hand near to the boy and tries to touch him. However, his hand moves across the boy. The boy is just an illusion created by magic. Isabel says it appears as a welcome message record mana. Locust Troman says it is as noisy as ever. He asks for how many years he cheated his appearance to record the message. Locust Troman says he is supposed to be a senile old man. He looks at the boy and says it is still nice to see him like this, Schweizer strove. Isabel asks him if this young boy is Schweizer. The boy looks at them and asks them what brought them to this place. The boy asks them to enlighten him. Isabel says it looks like they can talk to him. Locust Troman calls the boy by saying to him Schweizer. The boy laughs. He says they can try to say what they want to say, but he will play his part only as there is only a recording. The boy says no matter what they want, they will obtain it here. The boy says this place is his dungeon, the Schweizer's Stroh's dungeon. Locust Troman opens his mouth to ask something. Then he stops saying anything and looks down. He asks Schweizer how he died. The boy says he will only send his in with a little test. The boy gives only the recorded message. The boy says that to enter the dungeon, he has to provide the correct answer to the questions he is about to ask. Locust Troman keeps looking down. The boy tells him that even with a single incorrect answer, he may stuck in that place for his entire life. The boy asks him to be aware of this. Locust Troman looks at the boy and says his voice is like his friend's voice. He says his attitude is also the same. He says everything is like the back days. He says it is as if he had returned to the times when they used to talk and laugh together. He says, but his voice cannot reach them. He says he is the only one who is left alive. He clenches his hand and says no, he is not the only one who survived. He says those he loved and cared for returned to dust with time. He says, but who made them like this are still alive and ruling the world as if nothing has happened. His eyes look aggressive, burning with the spirit of revenge. He says his enemies are still alive. Isabel looks at her as if trying to read his mind. The boy says it is uncool of him to drag the conversation out. He asks him to start with the questions. Locust Troman looks at the boy. The young Schweizer asks him what Schweizer Stroh dislikes the most. The boy looks at his face to get the answer. Locust Troman replies that he hates the demigods the most. The boy jumps with joy and says, this is the correct answer. The boy disappears into the white smoke, and the door opens. Isabel looks at Locust Troman, who moves toward the open door. She wants to stop her. She closes her eyes and calls him. She comes after him and tries to ask him. She seems to run short of words as the sentences remain incomplete in her mouth. She wants to ask him who he is and how he knows these things about Schweizer's dungeon. She does not know how to ask these questions. She stays quiet over there. Locust Troman asks her not to stand as a dumbhead here. He makes her realize that they are inside Schweizer's dungeon. Locust Troman looks around in the dungeon. He says that as per Schweizer's personality, this cannot be a simple warehouse or anything like this. He says he does not know what sort of traps are waiting for them inside the dungeon. He says to Isabel that if she stupidly stands like this, she will be killed in no time. He asks her if she wants to become stronger. He says if it is that so, then stop overthinking and focus. Isabel says yes to him. She walks toward him. They step up. Locust Troman says let's see what is waiting for them inside a beginning or an end. They reach another door. Stone-made statues are standing on each side of the door. The door is the same as the entrance door. They look at the door to find a clue on how to open it. There is another globe just like the one placed at the main door. Locust Traman touches the globe, and it releases a magical aura in the form of white smoke. A young man appears out of the smoke. Isabel says it is a young man this time. Locust Traman says this is young Schweizer. He says it seems like he ages as they pass through the door. He says he has no idea why he is doing this. Young Schweizer says now he will ask the second question. Locust Traman asks him the second question. Young Schweizer says he should have remembered to explain. Young Schweizer says he has planned greater and better items as he heads inside. He tells him that he is permitted to take a single item with him. Young Schweizer says if he does not follow those rules, their cute little friend Golem will get mad. He says a single mistake and he will be out. He asks to be careful. Locust Traman asks him about Iris Fistfounder. Young Schweizer says she is a pretty annoying woman. He adds he cannot understand the thought process of the witches. He said when they were struggling to save the world, she went head over heels for a man and did not care if the world ended. Locust Traman asks him about the man. Isabel asks him if he is talking about the Black Witch Iris. The Black Witch Iris Fistfounder was a woman with ebony hair and a mysterious smile on her face all the time. The title Black Witch fits well with her personality in all aspects. No man in the world could ever resist her charm. Locust Traman says now when he thinks about her, he can say with surety there is no woman more alluring than her. Locust Traman laughs to think about Iris. Young Schweizer talks further. He says Iris has faults, but Locust Traman is worse than her. Young Schweizer asks how Locust Traman could not notice Iris's advances. He says he was supposed to be a mediocre mage. He adds this is quite more for a mage. Locust Traman takes it ill. Young Schweizer says how a man can be so dense with a woman who is mad in love with him. He asks if he is not a real magician. Isabel thinks Frey is the same as Sir Locust Traman in this regard. Young Schweizer keeps saying, he can surely say he is more dense than a golem. Then he suddenly remembers that he is supposed to ask the next question. He says oh wait, he has to ask the next question. Locust Traman thinks Schweizer is such a bastard. Young Schweizer says Iris has a contract with 3 devils. He adds she used these devils for the fights. He says that one of these 3 holds different weapons on each of his 6 arms and embodies the coexistence. Before he completes the question, Locust Traman answers the question and says he is Asura. The illusion of young Schweizer says he has given the correct answer. He says this and disappears in white smoke from where he appeared. The door opens after that. Locust Traman enters the door. Isabella says to him that he answered the question without even asking the end of the question. They enter the door. There are so many ornaments displayed elegantly on the large-sized showcases. They take a look at these ornaments. The old Schweizer appears before them and says he will ask the next question. Isabel looks at him and says he has aged again. Locust Traman looks at him and thinks he understands why he aged as they head inside. He says all the details are related to his life. He believes it is because the whole dungeon is his diary. He again looks at old Schweizer. He wants to ask what he thought when he created this place. He stops for a while and gets into deep thinking. He wonders to whom Schweizer intends to convey a message through this dungeon. Locust Traman answers another question declared correct by the illusion of Schweizer. Another door opens for him and they enter the dungeon. Then comes another question with another closed door. Locust Traman again gives the correct answer. The door opens for them. They enter inside it. Isabel says this is incredible. She says they have reached the 5th room already. Locust Traman ignores her compliments. He thinks it is odd that all the questions are unrelated to the magecraft. He says all the questions are about bizarre subjects instead. He wonders what his intentions behind these questions are. Isabel thinks he is even more mysterious than the questions for answering them correctly. They enter another room. Schweizer's quite old illusion tells them it is the last room. Locust Traman looks at the old man with a long white beard and calls him Schweizer. The man is standing with the support of a stick. The old man says Locust Traman, who was hailed as the strongest mage at 40, the Grand Master of humanity. He says it is his life's most incredible pride and joy to be able to consider him the greatest friend of him. Locust Traman says he sighs also feels lucky to have him as a friend. He says he is also his good friend. Isabel notices his answer and wonders what he said. The old illusion of Schweizer waits for a while and says now he will ask the last question. He asks what is his real name. Locust Traman says no wonder he kept all weird questions. Locust Traman closes his eyes and thinks for a while. He thinks he is asking the question that only he can answer. Now he gets the point why he is asking weird questions. He answers the last question. He says his real name is Schweizer Wilsonen. Isabel looks at Locust Tramen and wonders if Schweizer's real name is Wilsonen, not Stro. The illusion of Schweizer smiles and asks Locust Tramen to go inside. He says everything is ready for him inside. Locust Tramen is about to take a step toward the door. The illusion of Schweizer asks him to wait. Locust Tramen stops and looks at him. The illusion of Schweizer asks him to take care of everything. The illusion of Schweizer addresses him as Locust. After saying this, the illusion disappears in the white smoke. Locust Tramen tries to stop him as he wants to talk more with his friend. Locust Tramen tries to touch his friend, but the illusion disappears. Isabel looks stunned. She wonders why Schweizer called Frey Blake Locust Tramen. She says the great mage Schweizer called him Loku. She does not ask anything from him. They enter the next room. Locust Tramen says this is the last room. Isabel looks around in the room. She says this room is cozy where one can live, unlike the previous rooms. Locust Tramen leans and opens a box that is placed in one corner of the room. He says he found something. He takes a small bottle out of the box. Isabel asks him what this is. He gets straight and replies to Isabel that it is a frozen river. Isabel seems unable to understand him. She asks if he is saying he is holding a frozen river in his hand. Isabel asks him if it is that legendary solution created in the Wailing Cave with one drop forming every 1,000 years. She asks if it is the same that can explosively expand one's magic channel and increase one's inner mana. She says this solution raises the stage of ordinary humans to 4 with a single drop. Locust Tramen listens to her and says she is as knowledgeable as ever. Isabel says he has heard that it is just an imaginary solution. She says it is said that this solution does not exist in reality. She tries to take the bottle from him and asks again if he is saying that this is the frozen river solution. Locust Tramen again looks at the bottle and says he needs it if he wants to rise to stage 7. Isabel checks what else is there in the box. She asks him if he has come here for this thing. Isabel takes a pair of earrings out of the box. Isabel asks him what these are. Locust Tramen looks at them. Isabel says the design of the earrings could be better. The earrings emit a dim light. Locust Tramen looks at the earrings again and says that idiot Schweizer, the old rat, has to place them in this room. Isabel takes the earrings close to her ears. Locust Tramen puts one hand behind his neck and says these are typhoon earrings. He says he made those earrings. Isabel asks him if he made them. Isabel asks him what he means by this. Locust Tramen seems answerless. She asks how it is possible that what he has made is inside the final room of the Schweizer's dungeon. Locust Tramen says he made those earrings 4,000 years ago. Isabel looks at him in a way as if she tries to understand what he is saying. Locust Tramen says Schweizer is such a sneaky bastard. He talks in a way as if he is talking to himself. He says he had nothing else to do and gave it to Schweizer because he wanted to keep them for some reason. He adds how he knows that he has owned and stored for all the time. Isabel seems unable to comprehend whatever he is saying. She asks him if he can elaborate on what he is saying. The scene turned dramatic. He says he is Locust Tramen. Isabel seems answerless to hear this. Locust Tramen's words leave her stunned. Locust Tramen tells Isabel that 4,000 years ago, he and Schweizer rebelled against the demigod lord. He tells her that he was imprisoned in the darkness of the abyss by the demigod. He says he stayed there for 4,000 years. He further tells her that one day, a voice pierced through the abyss darkness and reached to him. He says it was Frey Blake's voice. He says he does not know how he called out to him. He says he does not know how their minds synchronized. He says he does not know how he spoke to him. He says Frey Blake called him, and he answered his call. He remembers how he puts his hand on Frey Blake's head. He tells Isabel that Frey Blake gave his body to him. Isabel stays silent for a while, and then she asks if that is so. Locust Tramen scratches his cheek and says he does not think that she would believe him. Isabel stays silent for some time. Then she says the whole story is inconvincible. She says, however, that there are many cases where this truth is apparent. Isabel smiles and looks at the earrings. She says this is quite odd. She says his far-fetched excuse explained everything. She again looks at the earrings and says so he is Locust Tramen. She says this in a way as if she is trying to digest this truth. She bows before Locust Tramen and gives him the earrings. She says she presents her heartfelt greetings to Sir Locust Tramen. Locust Tramen looks at her and takes the earrings from her. He asks her to call him Frey, as she used to say usually. He thinks it will help him to succeed in his goals. He sits in front of her. Isabel says she understands his point of saying this. He leans toward her ear and asks her to read his mood and act according to what she always does. He says she has given him goosebumps just now. Isabel smiles to hear this. They light up a candle in the room. Locust Tramen looks at the earrings. He asks Isabel why she said the design of the earrings is pitiful. Isabel takes a bracelet out of the box. She says, "Look at this sense-enhancing bracelet." She asks him if he made that one as well. Locust Tramen says this is something that Schweizer made. Isabel looks at the bracelet with love. Locust Tramen says this is a great sage staff. Locust Tramen tells him that Schweizer used it as if it were part of his body. Isabel asks him what he means by sage staff. She asks if this bracelet is something. Before she completes her sentence, Locust Tramen asks her to give that bracelet to him. He says if she uses the bracelet incorrectly, it may suck all the mana from her and kill her instantly. He takes that bracelet from her. Isabel says all right. Locust Tramen wears the bracelet in his hand. He also puts on the typhoon earrings in his ears. He manifests a strong mana after wearing these items. Isabel says this is awesome. She says this is an amazing mana increase Frey. He asks who Lucre is even supposed to be. Locust Tramen says it is not his style to use magical tools. He adds, but these are for friend's sake. Isabel takes another item out of the box and asks him what it is. She takes round-shaped items in her hand and asks him if it is a golem's core. Locust Tramen takes it and says, considering the mana from it, he cannot drink it now. He asks her to pack all these things. After that, all that is left is Schweizer's desk. There are a few pages, a diary, a written wing, and a candle on Schweizer's desk. The candle can be used for the entirety by using mana. Locust Tramen says Schweizer always preferred creating useless things like this. He stands by the chair and writing desk for a while. Isabel says she can feel the love and care of Lord Schweizer for him in the way he styled and detailed this dungeon. Locust Tramen touches Schweizer's diary and opens it. There is something written on it. Schweizer mentioned in the diary that Locust vanished. He also said in the diary that he is certain about the fact that the road is the culprit. Locust Tramen keeps reading the diary. Schweizer wrote that other than him, no one can disappear Lucas with no trace left behind. Schweizer wrote that it is more complex than a 9-star magician vanishes. He wrote Locus was a leader who united them all. Schweizer wrote Locus is the last hope of humanity that vanished. Locust Tramen becomes sentimental when reading Schweizer's diary. Locust Tramen notices that Schweizer mentions all the events that happened after his disappearance in the diary. Schweizer also mentioned the event of Magic Warrior King Cassigen's conflict with the Blade King Lucid. He said that Iris suddenly went missing. Schweizer wrote that the influence of the demigod was deeply integrated into the whole continent. Schweizer wrote that in the middle of it, he felt alone. He stated that he could not even trust his fellow humans during that time. Schweizer sadly mentioned that despite the apparent admiration and respect of his human fellows, their inner thoughts were filled with malice. All of them aimed for Schweizer's death. He mentioned all the details in the diary. He has recorded in detail all the battles that he fought daily. Locust feels sad to read all this. Locust Tramen reads about his friend's life and how he fought alone for their cause. He reads Schweizer's words of admiration. Schweizer mentioned that Locust Tramen was their leader. He said no one can replace him. Schweizer wrote that he tries to bear Locust's burden in his stead, but as time passed by, every second showed his lack of skills and the emptiness that Locust left behind. He further recorded that he was sorry that he could not succeed in their aim. Isabel cries to read the heartfelt words of Schweizer. Locust Tramen feels sad to read the life events of his friend. He clenches his hand and puts it on the diary. He cries to read all these things. He asks why Schweizer, the moron, gone this far on his own. Isabel calls him in an attempt to console him. Locust Tramen says he can feel how it feels to be left alone. He says after experiencing his current life, he can understand Schweizer's feelings. He closes Schweizer's diary with wet eyes and says he will inherit the loneliness that he felt along with his will. He asks his friend to watch over him. He says he will hit the demigod on his face for sure. Locust Tramen feels his friend's state of being when he is left alone. Isabel feels sorry for him. She wants to console him. She calls him. Isabel tells him that there is another page left in the diary. Schweizer wrote that the one who read it must complete Anastasia. He added that he had left all the records there. Schweizer mentioned on the last page that Anastalis is his masterpiece. Isabel read this page for him. Isabel asks Locust Trauman what Anastasia is according to him. He opens the bag and takes out a round-shaped thing from the bag. He brings it close and notices that the name Anastasia is mentioned on it. They come out of the dungeon. They walk up to go out of the tree's stem. Isabel says the gem must be a golem's core. Locust Trauman says Schweizer's had reached the pinnacle of the pup-petering. Locust Trauman says for Schweizer it must not be all to call Anastasi the masterpiece. Isabel stays silent for a while. Then she asks Locust Trauman if it was him, would he not have completed him with the golem's core? Locust Trauman stays silent. Isabel notices his silence and asks him what is the matter. He says the very first golem observed by Schweizer was the one that he created back then. He goes back to the past when Schweizer called his golem a shameless and disrespectful golem. He remembers how he asked if he called this shameless thing a golem. He remembers how he shouted at him and asked what was wrong with this golem. Back then, he presented his golem as an avant-garde that, according to him, had a cubist approach. He remembers how Schweizer called his golem a sexy provocation and land destruction. Schweizer laughed to see his golem. Schweizer called it hilarious and said he should not make golems at all. He remembers Schweizer said that he will make golem for him next time. He said that he should ask him to make one for him whenever he wants to have one. He said that he can make a better one by only using his tongue. He remembers Schweizer laughed badly to see his golem. He remembers him saying in between laughs that he cannot breathe. Then he remembers how he had gone mad at him and told him that he had not been beaten with a fireball for a long time. He also remembers how he hit him with a fireball and made him fly in the air. Locust Trauman keeps remembering all these memories with closed eyes. Isabel notices his silence and calls him. Locust Trauman comes out of the memories to hear the voice of Isabel. He puts golem in the bag. He says he has to complete this if he wants to know the rest of the history. He again takes the golem out of the bag. Isabel asks him what is unrecorded history. Locust Trauman replies it means everything that happened after he was locked in the abyss. They keep stepping up. Isabel asks him what is wrong with the unrecorded history. Locust Trauman gets mad at Isabel's constant questioning. He calls her and asks her to go toward the village immediately as soon as they reach outside. There are so many drakes flying in the air outside the place. They come close to the verge of the mountain. Isabel asks Locust Trauman what this is. Locust Trauman looks at the King of Drakes, behind whom there is a group of drakes. He looks at the King of Drakes and asks him if he is waiting for him. The Drake King growls to see them. Locust Trauman again questions King of Drakes if he is waiting for him. He asks him to answer his question. He says he knows that he is an intelligent monster. King Drake laughs and says he is an interesting person. He tells him that he was waiting for him. He adds he was waiting for the fearless person who stepped into the mighty Torkunda's territory. Locust Trauman says to King Drake that he must have noticed them back in the forest. He asks him why he did not attack them in the forest. Isabel feels that Loksu Trauman's voice is shaking. She says he has never seen him confused before. King Drake again laughs and says he was waiting for them to exit that place. Drake King says all those who come out of that place have something good on them. Locust Trauman thinks about the froze lake bottle. He looks at the Drake King and says now he understands how he became much bigger. King Drake opens his wings as if getting ready to attack. Locust Trauman says he has been using the dungeon to trap human beings. He says the monsters have been manipulating the dungeon that his friend has treasured more than his life. Locust Trauman feels angry to think that he has been using the dungeon as a trap to fill his insignificant stomach. His eyes blaze with light. He says that the monster needs a little beating. He remembers Iris saying to this monster that she does not like his eyes. He remembers how she orders him to stay down. The monster says to Locust Trauman that he does not like his eyes. Locust Trauman asks Isabel to run. Isabel asks him why. He says he is not confident and that is why he is asking her to leave. Isabel says that is exactly why she should not leave him alone here to face this gigantic monster. Drake King opens his mouth and releases a big fireball. He says the people like them taste the best. He proceeds toward them and asks them to allow him to eat them. Drake King throws the fireball at them. Locust Trauman opens his hand and he is wearing Schweizer's bracelet. The bracelet turns into pieces. The pieces form a long stick. Locust calls this stick Schweezer's staff. He releases the earth wall out of it and throws the rocky punches at the face of King Drake. King Drake gets hit by these throws. King Drake sighs with pain. Locust looks back and asks Isabel if she cannot hear what he is saying. He calls her a leech and says she is being a hindrance here. She understands why he is saying this. She runs away and says she will be back as soon as possible. King Drake throws fireballs constantly on him. He calls Locust a wrenching bastard. Soon, King Drake fills fire and smoke all around. He keeps throwing heavy fire flames. Locust jumps up to avoid the heavy attacks. King Drake flies after Locust as he tries to fly away. King Drake throws 4 to 5 heavy lashes of blazing flame toward Locust. The place turns into a fire river. Locust flies away from King Drake to avoid his attack. Meanwhile, he is encountered by other drakes. He finds them right in front of him. Locust earrings shine with a magical aura. He throws multiple ice spears at the drakes. Then he forms a circular magical aura in his hand. He expands the circular magical formation and creates a protection shield around him. That magical formation is called a windstorm. The drakes growl and try to enter that formation called windstorm. But they get badly hit by the windstorm. The windstorm tears the drakes into pieces. Locust looks back and sees the remains of the drakes spread in the air. However, he does not take this small victory to his head. He says killing these small fries does not make much change. He looks at King Drake, who is coming after him. Locust says he has to kill this big guy to end this fight. Locust stops at a distance from King Drake and turns toward him. He sees King Drake coming and thinks he needs 3 seconds to cast an explosion. He creates a fiery pattern in the air. After making that pattern, he calculates the speed of King Drake. Then he throws the magical formation onto King Drake. King Drake releases a fireball in response. Locust starts counting down to calculate the time when he should create an explosion. The explosion hits King Drake in the chest. The fire of the blast surrounds King Drake from all sides. King Drake somehow manages to deal with the explosion. Locust seems stunned to see this. King Drake says to Locust that the explosion is impressive. King Drake understands Locust's trick. He says he has estimated his speed and created an explosion beneath him. King Drake laughs and says it is a matter of shame that the attack was good, but his power was not good enough. He says his scheme barely tricked him. Drake King flaps his wings. The wind created makes Locust lose his balance. Locust tries to get balance and says the Drake is too big. He says facing him is Dorkunda Drake kind. He says there is a swarm of drakes behind him. He says he is in trouble. He thinks if there is anything that he can do in this situation. He thinks he should drink the frozen river now to deal with this situation. He remembers Isabel asking him if he was not going to drink it. She asked him if he was not planning to do it. He asks Isabel if she thinks the frozen river is a mere energy drink back then. He tells her that he requires 2 weeks to control the energy of the frozen river. He told Isabel that they could not stay here without food and water for so long. Locust remembers his conversation with Isabel and rejects the idea of drinking the frozen river solution. He says it would be suicide if he takes it now. He throws wind arrows to prevent drakes from coming close to him. He is stuck between so many drakes. He stops for a while to see King Drake so close to him. King Drake opens his big mouth to swallow him. Locust seems helpless to see death so close to him. He manages to move aside. Meanwhile, King Drake was attacked by heavy lashes of fire. It looks like a bombardment of fire attacks. Locust wonders who have done this. He looks at the King Drake. The phoenix stands on the head of one little drake and has taken the neck of King Drake in his beak. Locust calms down to see the phoenix. The phoenix sticks to the neck of King Drake as if he is not going to free it at any cost. The phoenix releases big lashes of fire to attack the phoenix. Soon, the phoenix knocks King Drake down along with the other swarm of drakes. Locust looks at the phoenix and says he is bursting with health. The phoenix makes a chirping sound as if trying to answer him. King Drake again recovers and tries to fly toward them. He calls the phoenix a little chick and asks it not to interfere in their matter. Locust looks at King Drake coming toward them with blazing eyes. He asks the phoenix to move aside. He tells the phoenix that the drake is not something that he can face. However, the phoenix flaps his wings and flies toward King Drake. The phoenix releases fire onto the drake. King Drake feels the heat of the fire and says it tickles. Locust-Traman tells the phoenix that the drake has a high resistance against the fire. He asks him to stop fighting with him. He further tells him that the drake is his eternal enemy. However, the phoenix seems determined to defeat King Drake. Locust-Traman again asks the phoenix to run away from the drake. He again calls the phoenix and asks him to listen to him. He says to the phoenix that he knew from the beginning but still came to save him. He asks the phoenix if he is trying to buy him some time. He asks the phoenix if he is asking to escape. The phoenix courageously fights against the gigantic drake. He seems not ready to leave Locust-Traman alone. Locust-Traman asks the phoenix if he wants him, Locust-Traman, to run away. The phoenix makes a complex pattern of fireballs and directs it toward the drake. The drake strikes him back with a big fireball. The bombardment of fireballs from both sides knows no end. Locust-Traman says his current physical condition is quite weak and pathetic. He says it is because his body is feeble. Then he negates his thoughts and says it is because his senses are dulled after being degraded for 4,000 years. He looks at the battle between the drake and the phoenix. He negates his second thought and says the reason behind his weakness is that his determination and resolution are lacking. He looks at the pattern of fireballs formed by the phoenix. He says sorry to the phoenix. He says he owes him one favor. He uses the staff of Schweezer and flies toward the cave. He enters the cave. It takes him a while to get there. He sits in the cave and says thanks to the phoenix. He says he will always remember to be determined in the hour of need. Locust-Traman takes out the bottle of the frozen river. He looks at the bottle and says death always surrounds him. He adds death is a daily occurrence. He pours the bottle of the frozen river into his mouth and says the phoenix should give him just a little more time. After drinking the frozen river solution, he feels a change in his body. His nose bleeds slightly. His features change. He opens his arms, looks upward and shouts as if trying to digest the energy given by the frozen river. He keeps shouting. His mouth also starts to bleed. The magical aura appears around him in the form of circular wind waves. The wind waves keep expanding. Locust-Traman punches the ground with his heavy fist. He leans forward and tries his best to control the magical aura generated by the frozen river solution. The scene shifts to the fight between King Drake and the phoenix. King Drake looks at the phoenix and says no wonder why he is familiar. He says he is the name that escaped from his grasp some time ago. King Drake looks at the phoenix with his blazing eyes and says it is a good day today. He says the human who ran was also a good prey. He adds that the tenacious energy of the phoenix will fill his stomach so much more. The phoenix gives him a look. King Drake sits on a rock and looks at the phoenix. He says a priceless prey has come in the form of a phoenix. The phoenix makes a cooing sound as he struggles to survive. King Drake looks at him and says what a wonderful meal is there. He asks the phoenix to give up. The phoenix seems tired. He takes a heavy breath. He gathers his strength and releases another fire attack on King Drake. However, the attack appears ineffective in hitting King Drake. King Drake says these are just useless attacks. When King Drake comes out of the fire attacked by the phoenix, he sees the phoenix has disappeared. He wonders if he has also escaped with the slimy bastard. King Drake tries to calm himself down and says it is fine. He says there is no need to rush. He says as long as they are in the Espana Mountains, they will cross paths again. The phoenix flies to the dense part of the forest. He falls to the ground. He releases a heavy breath. His beak bleeds. The phoenix manages to reach the waterfall. He makes sounds after reaching there as if trying to call Locust-Traman. Soon, Locust-Traman comes to him. He pats the phoenix with love and says it looks like they have found a powerful opponent again. The phoenix makes the cooing sound as if trying to say something to Locust-Traman. Locust-Traman understands him and says he can help him to recover. He puts his hand on the phoenix and says this is quite nostalgic. Locust-Traman says that an old friend of his behaved like him. He repeats these words in his mind that there is one more who acted like this. The scene shifts to the time when Locust-Traman takes the frozen lake solution and the phoenix fights against King Drake. King Drake calls the phoenix a little annoying vermin and attacks him. Locust-Traman struggles to tame the energy given by the frozen river solution. Locust-Traman releases ice spears in the cave in his attempt to control the power. He says he knew the burden would be big, but did not know that it would be as enormous as this. He gets tired because of the struggle to tame the inner mana. His mouth bleeds badly. Locust Traman calls Schweizer and says he is sorry that he ended up wasting the second chance at life as well. He says it is all his fault. He says it is because of his pride and confidence. He rests his head on the ground and says sorry to everyone. He says he does not have the power to absorb the energy of the elixir. He says it may not be the energy that he is lacking but the resolve. He lies on the ground unconscious. He falls into darkness. He suddenly gets consciousness. He asks why he is slowly gaining energy. He feels something and asks what is this warming aura. He tries to wake up and moves his body. Isabel asks him to stay still. She tells him that he does not have enough energy to move yet. He opens his eyes and asks Isabel why she is here. Locust Traman looks pale and blood dries near his mouth. Isabel tries to give him warmth by using her magical aura. She says he said that he needs food and water to absorb the frozen river energy. Locust Traman asks her if she has gone to the village to bring food. Isabel says earlier that he had said that he had left alone. He remembers what he said and he realizes how it feels to be left alone. Isabel says she does not know what he is trying to accomplish in the world, but she is with him. She says she trusts him. She adds he is the only one that he trusts. She asks him not to say that he is alone. She says she is with him. She keeps trying to warm him up. Isabel says he cannot look after him properly. Locust Traman smiles and says thanks to her. He thinks he is lacking something that he does not have. He says it is neither courage nor resolve. He says it was trust within those who are alive. He gathers his strength. Isabel keeps giving him warmth so he can recover soon. The Phoenix and King Drake fight outside the cave. King Drake suddenly feels a magical aura. He stops and asks what is this terrifying cold aura. The cold aura is coming out of the cave where Locust Traman has released it in his attempt to tame the energy. The Phoenix takes advantage of the moment and jumps at King Drake. He attacks his eye and gags it out. King Drake gets further offensive at this. He takes the Phoenix in his sharp teeth. The Phoenix flaps his wings to get free from the grip of King Drake. King Drake says how a mere bird like him dares to attack and injure the greatest Torkunda's eye. He smashes the Phoenix on a hard rock. King Drake says to the Phoenix that he is at the death door now. He asks the Phoenix to wipe out the grin off his face. A strong, cold mana keeps flowing out of the cave. King Drake gets badly hit by the hard magical aura coming out of the cave. King Drake feels that he is unable to resist this magical aura. He says it is dangerous. He wonders what is going on inside the cave. The flow of cold magical energy hits all the drakes so hard, they seem unable to resist that energy. The strong ice spears start to flow out of the cave. Soon, all the drakes get frozen in the middle of the air after getting hit by a cold magical aura. However, King Drake manages to resist it by now. King Drake keeps coming close to the cave. He says it is for the first time in thousands of years that he is feeling this emotion. He says his instincts are telling him to run away. Locust Traman stands at the entrance of the cave. A strong cold aura fills the surrounding area and keeps coming out of his body. His hair flickers in the air, giving him a majestic look. King Drake feels afraid to see Locust Traman and runs away. He says it is impossible that he, the great Torkunda, feels scared of a human. He says it does not matter how much he fights back, but he is still a human. He says he needs to wait and stay away for now. He challenges Locust Traman and tells him to wait until his eye recovers. However, Locust Traman manages to reach him with the help of his mana. King Drake turns to fly away. The moment he turns, he finds Locust Traman right in front of him. King Drake says this is impossible. He says how a mere human manages to catch him. Locust Traman forms multiple pointed ice arrows and directs them toward King Drake. He then throws them onto King Drake all at once with a hand movement. The sharp ice arrows hit King Drake at the same time. The ice arrows drag him backward. King Drake calls him a measly human in anger. He flaps his wings and takes all the ice arrows out of his body. He growls with aggression. Locust Traman moves to another location, and King Drake finds difficulty locating him. He asks where he is. Locust Traman's voice reaches him. He says his arrogance has weakened him. He asks how a 1,000-year-old monster can solely rely on his eyes. Locust Traman stands close to his injured eye. King Drake says the bastard keeps moving to his blind spot. Locust Traman takes advantage of the moment. He forms a big ice arrow and thrusts it into the eye of King Drake. King Drake sighs with pain. He calls his opponent a bastard. Then he growls wildly. King Drake smashes Locust Trauman in a rock. He looks at the dust with one eye. He laughs to see that he succeeds in hitting his opponent. However, he soon receives another attack by him. He turns toward the direction of attack. He finds Locust Trauman standing on the pile of debris. He asks him if he is really a human. Locust Trauman's aura starts to fill that place as well. King Drake growls and asks him who he is. King Drake flies close to him. Locust Trauman stands still fearlessly. Isabel hides herself behind a boulder and observes this. Isabel says Frey is not in a position to fight with King Drake. She thinks he must be on the verge of collapsing. She says he should not drag out a battle right now. Locust Trauman manifests recently achieved mana and forms a gigantic-sized ice spear to attack King Drake. He holds it in the middle of the air with a movement of his hand. He keeps a cold expression on his face. King Drake says this is such an overwhelming energy. He asks him if it is his greatest energy. He forms a big fireball and says let's end this war. King Drake says he does not know how this human turns so strong. He feels confident. He says even the eternal beast Phoenix could not hold back this breath. He thinks a mere human like him does not hold a chance to stand against this breath. He throws the fireball at Locust and says he will soon be a piece of dead meat. Locust Trauman